Shalom, friends. Welcome to the Shiur in Tanya, the Sefer Shel Beinonim, also known as the Likutei Amarim, written by Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, 18th century, first rabbi of the Chabad movement. I'm Eliyahu Shir from Chesed Ve'emet. My site can be found on www.lovingkindness.co. So we're speaking about the nature of the soul, and we're on chapter 30 at the moment. We started it last week. I'm just doing a very quick review so we know exactly where we're at. And the idea that we're speaking about is called Timtum HaLeiv, whereby the heart feels a sense of dullness to it. Don't feel so inspired to serve Hashem. Many times we start davening to God, we don't feel the excitement. And this, of course, can extend to other areas of Torah as well. It can extend to Torah study. It can extend to areas of mitzvah performance. It can extend to all different types of areas of our avodas Hashem. Now, the thing is that due to this taking place, we need to find some sort of a way as to how to combat the Timtum HaLeiv. And one way that we can do it is to break the body. As we said in previous shiurim, the idea that the Zohar gave is to take, for example, a log, and if the log does not catch a light, what we do is we break up the log into splinters, and then the light will take effect and the log will burn. Now, that is one way of dealing with the Timtum HaLeiv, whereby we break through the material, which is the external sitra akra that is holding us back, and the fire burns out. We could also imagine it as any type of fruit, for example, a coconut or a banana, or any type of a fruit that happens to have a peel around it. And we want to get inside to enjoy the fruit that's inside. Now, what we need to do is to smash open the external peel, and then immediately the internal part is able to reveal itself. And of course, that's very tasty. Now, the Alter Rebbe in chapter 30 is going to give us another way to deal with the concept of how to come to see who we really are. The concept of Timtum HaLeiv is disturbing us. We need to break through so that the depression doesn't affect us, and therefore the godliness in ourselves spreads out and makes a really great effect. And he began his discussion in the last week that we were learning this together, in that he said that what we should do is take into account the words of the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, which say, "V'havei Shafel Ruach bifnei kol adam." A person should be humble in front of everybody. This is a very difficult thing to do, of course, and hence the reason why we're learning it in the Torah. It is only too easy to lose track of what this is. And as a result of this, of course, the real internal ourselves cannot break forward, and that's what leads us to the Timtum HaLeiv. But funnily enough, when we are able to deal with the situation of humbling ourselves towards other people, or seeing ourselves in a humble light towards other people, that gives us the ability to break out. Again, these are all great tests. The fact that we're learning it together doesn't mean to say we've mastered it. I always like to say we can learn our Musar together, we can learn our Hasidus together, and we can have this great shiur, we can have some cake, we can have some coffee, everybody's laughing, it's a great story, and you walk away and you feel so inspired about everything. But suddenly the reality hits. When does the reality hit? You're in a queue and you're waiting for your chance at the till to pay for all of your things. And as you do so, so-and-so pushes his way in or pushes her way in. And all of a sudden, everything we've learned about falls by the wayside. We're not interested in it at all. Suddenly the anger sets in, the jealousy sets in, all the different traits that affect us in a negative sense. So what we do is we try to contemplate it at least during the period of the shiur, and hopefully then when we get stuck into the queue, suddenly this particular lesson comes out and we're able to adjust to it. So the first thing is there are two types of humility. One is called shiflut, which means humility. The other is called anivut, which means humility. Shiflut refers to the concept of humility in connection with other people. In other words, I see myself as less than they are, simply because I know that I am less than they are. The concept of anivus, humility, which is another type of the humility, shiflut, anivut. Humility is the concept of, although I know how great I am, I will not admit it. I will see myself in a lesser light. For example, a person who's an anav would be a person who has mastered all of Shas and Poskim. He can quote you all of the Talmud off by heart, And yet, when you say to him, you're a giant in Torah, you seem to know all of these quotes, you know exactly where it's coming from. And he says to himself, he says to the fellow, I'm not really that great that you think. That is real humility in the sense of anivut. Shiflus, on the other hand, is when I see somebody else, no matter who they are, and I say to myself against them that perhaps I'm not as great as they are. The Alter Rebbe says this is the key to mastering the idea of destroying the Timtum HaLeiv within ourselves. Once you begin to see another person in the light, that they are really greater than we are, and we realize our place relative to who they are, this will help us to break through and let the godliness shine out of ourselves. Now, we continued and we said, in reality over here, we said that in front of every single person, we should see ourselves in this way, just like Moshe Rabbeinu did himself. When he looked at a fellow Jew, he would say, but if that Jew had the same qualities that I have, the great mental abilities that I have, the great spiritual power that my soul has, surely he would do even more. He would accomplish even more in his life than I am doing. So when I look at him, I realize that perhaps he is indeed greater than I am. There's another way to see it. Let's see onwards. And he says, even in front of the least of the least. This is what our rabbi said. Don't judge your fellow until you get to his place. When do you get to your fellow's place? When you have gone through his life from the moment he was born. Correction. From the moment that he was conceived. From the moment that he was conceived until the point that you see him to today, if you have gone through the same experiences that he has, then you are entitled to make a judgment against him. However, if for some reason, could be such a thing, that perhaps you don't really know one or two things in his life that might have happened as to lead him on the particular path that he is on, then the Torah says you may not make a judgment against him. The only time we can judge somebody is if we are literally in their shoes from the moment of conception, because of course they have gone through a particular type of pregnancy, they have nurtured off the particular products that their mother has eaten and has drunk. So that has an effect on them. When they were born, certain things took place. Perhaps the doctor took the person out of the mother's womb in a way that caused hurt to the child and has affected the child for the entire lives. And of course, how was the child brought up? What were the parents like? How did they discipline this child? What type of an education did they get? And what type of friends did he have? What type of environment he was brought up in? And now you see the fellow in the particular way that he is, and you say, now that fellow, there is something wrong with him. Well, once we do that, we have made a misjudgment. Of course, that doesn't mean to say that we cannot judge a person in the legalistic sense of the word. If a person does something that is incorrect, they steal, they murder, God forbid. Of course, we don't mean to judge them on how their life came out, what type of environment they came from, and therefore we exempt them. Of course, they are liable. But that is not what the Alter Rebbe is speaking about. We're not talking about legal liabilities. We're talking about the general concept of judging another person according to his station in life. And when we look at that person, says the Alter Rebbe, we need to be what's called Shafel Ruach, which means we need to be humble in seeing that perhaps that person is really greater than I am. And we see it in the real sense of the words. We say to ourselves, this is a reality. It's not something that I'm making up. The Alter Rebbe says, it is his place that is causing him to sin. It is as a result of where he finds himself that he is led along the path to commit this particular Aveira. Because here's an example the Alter Rebbe is giving us so that we can understand the concept in a more simple manner. Let's take, for example, a person who finds himself in the marketplace. He is a shop owner and he's selling things in the marketplace. And you'll notice that the way that he dresses and the way that he talks is a little bit under the standards of kings and queens. So at this point in time, you say to yourself, oh, what a disgusting individual. Look at the way he talks. Look at the type of garments he wears. They're filthy. All sorts of comments that we make about people. You know what the reason could be? The reason here is that this particular fellow has to do panasa. He has to do his livelihood to be in the marketplaces all day long. And he is of those people who sit on the corners He's the type of fellow who has to go out and he has to work hard because nobody else is helping him. He cannot find a job working from his computer on the internet and simply interacting with people via a webcam. Instead, this particular fellow is stuck. His only choice and his ability is to sell apples in the middle of the marketplace. He has to be up early in the morning and he has to sell these apples already from 7 o'clock when people start going to work. Already he's up and ready to sell and make a success of his panasa. He then remains in the marketplace for the entire day until 8, 9 o'clock in the evening, still selling his fruits and vegetables, attracting attention, shouting at everybody, buy from me, special, special. And when we see this fellow walking and behaving in this way, we say, oh, he seems like a nothing. Look what a type of person he is. He's so degrading, so degraded. And this fellow also that we're making this misjudgment upon, that we think, oh, he's such a, oh, what type of a character is he? His eyes sees all the desires around him. What does he see at the marketplace? Rest assured, he's not looking at a page of Torah with the Hebrew letters on it that are speaking about lofty, godly concepts. I'll tell you what he's looking at. He's looking at all the people passing by. Some of them are dressed extremely immodestly. Others walk in a most immodest fashion. Some talk in an immodest fashion. And some jingle about and move about in ways that attract attention. And as these people walk past him, he looks at them. And of course, his desires are stirred. And his eye sees and his heart desires. The Yitzro Bo'er, and his Yetzer, his inclination begins to burn. Ki, as it's like it says in the book of Hosea, Tanu Bo'eret Ma'ofeh. It's like an oven that's burning, like the baker's oven that's burning. Now, the baker's oven that burns is infinitely more hot. Well, not exactly infinitely, but certainly a lot more hot than the regular domestic oven. Why is that? Because the oven of the baker has to take care of the entire population, the entire city, the entire village. And therefore, the burning that goes on in that oven is extremely hot, more so than we would burn in our own ovens in our private capacity, because we're only burning, of course, for ourselves. The Alter Rebbe says to us, this fellow, his yetzer is burning, not like the regular domestic oven, but rather like an oven that belongs to the baker. Can you imagine the heat that's going on here? That is what's going on inside him, because his panasa is in the marketplace. His panasa is in the place where people are walking around immodestly. As it is written in the book of Hosea, the same thing over here. We see this is chapter 7, verse 6, as opposed to 7:4. He's burning, or it is burning like a flaming fire. Which is not the case, a person who goes to the marketplace only a little bit. When does he go to the marketplace? When he has to do his shopping, of course. Well, that's like once a week, let's say, perhaps. Maybe it's twice a week, but it's certainly not every single day. He doesn't have to do a big full load of shopping every single day of his life. Hopefully, if he gets his act together and his life together, he goes to the shop once a week. In today's times, for example, in the era that we're living at the moment with a particular virus, we know that many people are doing a lot more online shopping than they used to do before to avoid additional contact with people. So they sit at home, they click the buttons, they choose what they want, put it into their carts, and off they go. And the next day or a few hours later, lo and behold, turns out all the things that they wanted are there at their very doorstep. Fantastic. Can you imagine the difference in quality of people between the one person who puts his whole order online and then he opens the door and it's all there, and the other person who must walk to the bus stop, see all sorts of things, catch the bus, deal with everybody who's on the bus screaming and loud noise. The radio is on full blast according to the channel that the bus driver wants, but nobody else likes that channel. And afterwards, he gets off the bus. How does he get off the bus? As he walks off the bus, already the bus driver is slamming the door upon him, and the bus driver is shouting at him. And as he gets off, he turns around and he's upset. And now the bus driver kept the cart inside and he has to open up the door. Then he gets out. Then he gets to inside the store. He's got to pass through security first. The security guard interrogates him. Then he moves through, and so on and so forth. He goes through this terrible motion of having to deal with all the activities involved. How can we compare the two people? One person is involved in a simple transaction, which is relatively easy to do. The second person is filled with frustrations. Now, you know what happens very often? The person who's filled with all those frustrations is the very person that we're speaking about, who we regard as that low life person. He seems to push his way around everywhere, and people say, what a lowly person this is. How can he behave that way? But little do we know, because we're not in his shoes, that the fact is he has learnt in his life that the only way he was able to get through his life was to keep pushing through and shouting at people. Of course, that's not the correct behavior, as the Alter Rebbe is going to tell us in a moment. But nevertheless, we must take into account that when we see this particular person behaving in that way, the Alter Rebbe says to us, be Shafel Ruach. You have to be humble. You have to be humble in the sense not by yourself humble, but humble relative to who he is. And therefore, when we look at him, we say, you know something? Perhaps he's a greater individual than I am. Perhaps were I to have that situation and walk to the bus stop, which is 600 meters away from my home, and in addition to that, wait for the bus, which takes 20 minutes. Then I have to get on the bus myself and deal with all the politics and the bureaucracy that goes on the bus itself and all the people. Then I get off the bus and I find myself in a whole new world, walking through different security mechanisms, walking past people who are dressed immodestly, having to deal with queues, having to deal with pushing, all sorts of things. You know, perhaps if that was me, I wouldn't do as well as he's doing. Oh, all of a sudden, the person is able to say to himself, I must be humble. I humble myself in front of him because you know something? He may be a greater person than I am relative to his station in life of what he is doing, that if I were in his situation, I myself would behave in a manner that would be even worse than the way that he is behaving. So this is what he says over here. This is not the case of a person who goes to the marketplace only a little bit. And the majority of his day is spent at home. Or the Torah scholar who spends the majority of his day in a kollel. What's he doing? Well, he's having a great time. But let me point out, when I say great time, I don't mean to say that he's just simply sitting there looking into space dreaming. He's opening up the various Torah texts. He's studying, he is learning, he's growing. Be'ezrat Hashem, he's going to make a great contribution to society. Perhaps you don't see it today, but perhaps in a year's time he will become a sofer, and perhaps another year later he'll become a mohel, and maybe another year later he'll be in charge of the kashrut division of the particular beis din in your town, or maybe he'll become a dayan in 10 years' time. But in the meantime, we think he's having a great time. Well, he's not having the great time as if he's on Fantasy Island, but rather he is enjoying his studies, he's growing, and he's developing himself. Nevertheless, we cannot compare his situation of sitting in the kollel and studying and looking at beautiful Torah words, beautiful thoughts and growing, to the fellow who's forced to be in the marketplace, working and selling fruits and vegetables, shouting at everybody, buy my fruits and vegetables, working out the prices, dealing with the till, dealing with the credit card machine, dealing with things and when things go wrong, and how to talk to the customer, how to get their attention, etc., etc. V'gam, likewise, if he would go the whole day into the marketplace, could be this particular person that we're speaking about who spends his day at home all day. It could even be that were he to go into the marketplace for whatever reason that he had to do, but perhaps in his nature, he's not such a heated person. He's not a hot person. What does it mean to be a hot person? People have different midot. People have different attributes within themselves. Some people are hot by nature. Let us give an example. Let us talk about the idea of sexual attraction, for example. And we see that by one person is not stimulated by somebody of the opposite sex to the degree that another person is. Some people are crazy. Some people feel this drive. It just pulls them. They don't know what to do with themselves. Another person is like, well, you know, if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And they're a bit more calm. They're a bit more relaxed. Inside themselves, they're not heated up. But another person is. Now, the problem is we don't see that. So what we do is we judge their behavior by our feelings. If I am cold by nature, how can he be so hot? If I don't feel such a drive that I have to look at every woman that passes by in the street, how can he be such a person to, God forbid, he has to look at every single pretty woman that walks down the road? I know I don't have that problem. What's the matter with him? He must be a sick individual. But the Alter Rebbe says that is not 100% true. The Alter Rebbe says each of us is created in a way whereby our natures are defined within ourselves according to a particular system that God has pumped into ourselves at the time we are born. We have different intellectual abilities. We have different emotional abilities. Some people by nature are very angry people, and they really have to work on their anger. Some people are less angry. And other people say, anger, I don't need a part of that. And they're happy-go-lucky. Nothing seems to bother them. So the Alter Rebbe is saying to us, it could be that if this person who spends all day at home, and he still makes a judgment about that low life who behaves in a certain way at the marketplace, and he says, well, if I were to go to the marketplace, I would not behave in that way. Could be. But that could be because in his nature, he's a cold person. Because the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, is not equal for every single person. And then the Alter Rebbe says there's a person whose nature of his inclination goes this way, there's a person that goes that way. Everybody knows to himself how his Yetzer Hara attacks him in different ways. And yet when he looks at other people, he often sees that they don't seem to have that test. Well, that's all right. They don't have that test. It could be their test is different. Hence the reason for the Mishnah. Be humble in front of every person, because we don't know that if we were to be faced with the same tests and the same emotional, intellectual composition within ourselves, if perhaps it would be, we would behave even worse than he is behaving. We've explained in another place. And behold, the Alter Rebbe comes to turn things around, and he says to us, in reality, but even if a person is like that, even if a person is really hot in his nature, and his panasa, his livelihood, is to be of those who sit on the corners all day long selling the fruits and vegetables. He has no excuse for his sins. So the Alter Rebbe says, it's true. On my side, I must be careful not to misjudge my fellow man who might be hotter than I am. He might have that heat inside him. Nevertheless, it doesn't excuse the person to say, well, I'm hot by nature, and therefore I will behave in this particular way. That is not correct either. There is no excuse for not working on oneself. There is no excuse for stimulating this heat, this Yetzer Hara, for getting carried away with it, for putting oneself in a position that enhances it and makes it come out even more. Umikre Rasha Gamur, and he is in fact called a complete evil person. This fellow who is hot by nature, and he's watching all the ladies go by, and he's attracted, and he gets carried away, so much so that he's not even aware of the business that he's involved in. He's called a Rasha Gamur. He's involved in some activity that the Torah says, don't follow after your eyes and after your hearts. He's committing a big behaviour at this point in time. He needs to focus back onto what he's at the marketplace for, which is to sell his wares, to make a profit, to support his family, and ultimately to serve Hashem in the best possible way, fulfilling the 613 mitzvot. And the reason that he is called a Rasha Gamur is because he has no fear of God opposite his eyes. In reality, the person who is involved in this forbidden activity, whatever it may be, negative sights or behaving in a gross manner, a very materialistic manner, a gruff manner, etc. When a person behaves like this, he is showing himself to be a more base person. The Torah doesn't say there's something wrong with being base if the person's nature is like that. But the Torah is telling us the fact that he has that nature still does not exempt him from behaving in the correct way. He still needs to work on himself. He still needs to improve his nature. He still needs to get rid of the anger, the base behavior that he is exhibiting. He needs to say, no more, I'm going to control myself. And even if it's once, even if it's twice, it's better than nothing. Because he should have held himself back. He should have restrained himself and he should have ruled over the spirit of his desire, which is in his heart, because of the fear of God. Imagine, for example, who sees all of his actions. I mean, imagine, for example, that a person knows that there's a camera at the marketplace filming him. And who's watching through the camera? It's the policemen. The policemen who are providing law and order in the society. Well, we hope, of course, that they're providing law and order in society. But the policemen are looking through this camera all day on their screens. And they're watching this businessman, this fellow at the market selling his apples and oranges. And they notice that while he's selling the apples and oranges, for example, he quickly takes one of the apples that he just sold the client and he puts it in his pocket so that he can have another apple to sell, but he charged the client for it. And as a result, he makes extra profit selling the apple twice. But if he knew that the camera was watching him, he'd think twice about his actions. After all, if the policeman is watching him and sees what he does, the policeman might hold him into be doing an illegal activity, and as a result, he'll be taken to court and he'll be liable to pay a fee and a penalty to the person who he stole from. Now, there's no difference to a person who behaves in any immodest manner while they're engaged in their market activity. Just because they are base by nature does not give them the right to behave in that way. And just as it is that they would feel a sense of fear were they to know that a king or the policeman were watching them from the camera, so too they must realize there is a king watching, there is a policeman watching, it's God. And therefore, while I'm engaged in the activity, even though I am a base person, nevertheless, I will be careful and I will do my best not to behave in an immodest manner. And perhaps the policeman will have mercy on me. Perhaps the king will have mercy on me if he notices that I do something which I shouldn't have engaged in doing. Then, of course, I rely upon his mercy. He will see me as the type of person who says, I'm working on myself and I've stumbled this one time, and that's okay. It happens to the best of us. As we wrote above, that the mind, the head, rules over the heart over always. Since the person is born, basically, the moment he's born, there's this principle that he has that the mind rules over the heart. As we learned at the beginning of Tanya, that is the concept that we go through all the time. The heart desires certain things, but before the body processes what the heart is desiring, the heart sends the message of its emotions towards the mind. The mind contemplates on what is happening, and the person then finally puts into action according to the directions of the mind. The mind can rule over the heart. Anybody who doesn't believe such a thing should do well to have seen, or not that I should advertise such things, but anybody who knows about such things will be quite aware of the power of the mind. Those people who have ever seen a stage hypnosis whereby the hypnotist hypnotizes people and tells them certain things that go to their heads, and then he snaps his fingers and he tells them when they come out of their particular state that they will think this way or they'll behave in this way, and all of a sudden they begin to behave in such a manner. We see over here that the mind is a very powerful thing, and even if the heart draws up certain images of desire, the mind is so much more powerful that it can completely rule over it. It's a matter of tapping into the mind correctly. It's a matter of controlling our minds correctly to rule over the heart. The person who's a base person, we're not saying there's something wrong with him in the sense that he's disgusting. God created him that way. God has put him through all sorts of tests. Nevertheless, his duty is to overcome those tests. On our side, says the Alter Rebbe at the beginning of our chapter, we must still be Shafel Ruach. In front of every single person, we must still be humble. We must still look at that person and say, you know what? Even though he should control himself, even though it is that he has his own problems and his own duties, but my responsibility is to judge him in that favorable sense, in that to imagine that were I to be in that situation, perhaps I wouldn't behave in such a great manner as he is doing. What I'm doing to myself, for those who are listening to the message going on here, is I'm breaking myself down. I'm making myself aware, just like that log that couldn't catch a light, and I needed to splinter it so that the small splinters would catch the light would catch onto it, and it would burn. This is exactly what I'm doing to myself now in this situation. I'm breaking myself down. How do I break myself down? When I humble myself to every single person. I don't know everything in the world. I am not the almighty, all-powerful, greatest person in the world that knows the answers to every question and knows every single piece of news that's happening in the world from one side of the world to the other, that knows God's plans from the beginning of time till the end. No, I'm not that person, as many people actually think about themselves. Instead, I realize that no matter how great I am, how developed I am, how much I have grown and studied, I say to myself that when I look at that person, perhaps in a certain sense, he is after all even greater than I am. V'hine, and behold, be'emes, in reality, shehi milchama gedola v'atzuma, it is a great war. It's a powerful war. Lishbor hayetzer, to break the inclination, habo erka eish lehava, which is burning like a fiery, flaming fire, mipnei pachad Hashem, because of the fear of Hashem. And it's like a test in reality. This whole scenario we're talking about is a massive test. Once again, I'm pointing it out. Remember, when we sit in these shiurim and we learn these concepts, they become very inspirational to us. We say, oh, if only I could be like that. Oh, I can imagine myself standing in that queue right now, and somebody's pushing in, and I say to myself, I will be so humble. I will be Shafel Ruach in front of every person. Oh, that person pushed in. It's okay. It could be that he's a greater person than I am. I'll just let him in. And as we learn the shiur together and we feel inspired, we feel we can really do it. And then all of a sudden, when we're at the queue, in reality, we're standing there. We realize we have to be home in half an hour, and the queue is moving pretty slowly. If things don't happen fast, I'm not going to get home in time. And then, guess what? Somebody pushes in with their trolley. They've got 200 items in it. You say, excuse me, sir. Excuse me, ma'am. I think that I am before you. Oh, no, he says. You're not before me. I came before you. Do you see that milk bottle over there? I say, yes. Well, I left it there to say that I'm in the queue. Now I've brought all of my trolley and I'm taking the place right over here where the milk bottle is. I was here long before you. I just went to do all my shopping while I left the milk bottle in the place of the queue where I was standing. And now I'm back in my position. And we say to ourselves, oh, yes, you know something, I will humble myself to you. It's all inspirational when we think about the concepts on a theoretical level. But practically speaking, once we're involved in that situation, how indeed are we going to behave? Let me just bring a story just to give a little bit of life to the shiur. And that is a famous story about Rabbi Aryeh Levine, the tzaddik in Yerushalayim, died in 1969. A worthwhile book. Anybody who wants to learn what is a tzaddik and how does the tzaddik behave, please go ahead and purchase it. A Tzaddik in Our Time by Simcha Raz. And the story tells that once it happened that Reb Aryeh, the tzaddik, was walking in the snow. And as he was doing so, he was passing by a fellow who, on purpose, seeing the rabbi in his garb, looking like a rabbi, of course, and this particular fellow, he had no desire to be on good terms with any of the rabbinical authorities. He had a hatred towards them. And as he approached Reb Aryeh, he stuck out his leg on purpose, and as Reb Aryeh was walking through the snow, he didn't notice that the fellow had done this, and of course, Reb Aryeh fell directly into the snow. When Reb Aryeh got up, of course, you can imagine, he could have said to the fellow, excuse me, sir, you know, what you did is not the correct behavior. Excuse me, sir, we don't go around tripping people. Excuse me, sir, do you know I'm a rabbi of a yeshiva over here, of a big community. I help people and all sorts of things. Do you not know who I am? He could have said all sorts of things to express the greatness that he was. Instead, Reb Aryeh got up and he says to the fellow, oh, I'm very sorry that I was in your way. I must have been walking a little bit too close to you, and I certainly apologize that I accidentally fell over your foot. And Reb Aryeh got up and he walked along with a smile on his face. It didn't bother him in the least. That is a story that is brought about him. There are many other such fascinating stories. It is well known that indeed he was a very humble person, and indeed he saw himself in that very light, where when he looked at other people, he saw them always as being greater than he was. Although, of course, he was the tzaddik of Yerushalayim. There wasn't anybody to compete against his greatness in righteousness, his greatness in Torah scholarship, all these different areas. Yet in front of people, he was exceedingly humble. What is the difference then between Reb Aryeh Levine, the tzaddik, and ourselves? Generally speaking, at least I can speak about myself, if not anybody else. The difference is that Reb Aryeh internalized these teachings to such a degree that they were him. The Tanya and all these other books, well, I don't know to what degree he'd studied Tanya particularly. Perhaps he did. Chances are that he did, in fact. I don't know what he studied and what he didn't. But whichever books he was studying, they all became a part of him, so that he was a living testament to the work that he was studying. When the event took place for him to realize the importance of humility, he put it into practice. He was that humble person. When we study these teachings together, we ourselves have to internalize it so that we too can become that person, not in potential, but rather in reality. That is our duty. So therefore we see, and therefore every person needs, according to his station in life, according to his place, at his level, in the service of God. Lishkol v'livchon, he needs to weigh out and he needs to test. He needs to find he has to do a litmus test, ba'atzmo, upon himself. Im hu oved Hashem, is he serving God? If he is serving God, be'erech u'bechinas milchama atzuma kazo v'nisayon kazeh. Is a person really serving God? He needs to ask himself, in accordance with the level and the aspect of the great war like this, which is, and a test like this, every person needs to ask himself, am I fighting the war? Am I playing around with life and just going by happy-go-lucky with not a care in the world? Or am I actively involved? How do I know when I'm succeeding in life? When I'm actively involved in that war, when it's a reality. When I'm standing in the queue and I'm angry because somebody just pushed in and made up an excuse why they're before me, and I'm actually angry and I don't know what to do with it, that's the war. Now I say I'm going to control myself. I'm going to work on myself. That's life. That's what we're working on. Life is not just that aspect of everything simply moving smoothly because everybody else does what they're supposed to do and I'll do what I do. On the contrary, we are faced constantly with tests and trials. When we feel the trial, when we feel the test, that is a proof in itself that we're on the right path. What we have to do now is overcome it and be successful. Bebechinas va'asei tov. And this is all in the aspect of doing good, as we're going to see in the next lesson, but we'll learn more about that later. Thanks very much for joining me. I'm Eliyahu Shear from Chesed Ve'emet. My site's www.lovingkindness.co. If you've enjoyed the shiur, please do show your appreciation and help me by liking my video, clicking on the thumbs up button. Please share this video with family and friends. Feel free to make a comment. You're helping me as well by interacting, and I know that you're enjoying it or getting something out of it. Have a question about it, and I'd be happy to respond. Likewise, my website is always open, and please feel free to send me an email. I'd be delighted to be in touch with you about any subject of Torah, growth, life, all those various things that we're learning about here. In the meantime, thanks for joining me. Join me further for another shiur, and I wish you everything of the best. Shalom, shalom. Bye-bye.